Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm delighted today to be joined by two gentlemen who are the co-founders of Dealing with Debt, Desmond Stinnie and Addison Wiggin. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, thanks.
It's great to have you. We're going to be talking about financial literacy and some of the reasons why you founded Dealing with Debt. But before we do that, we always like to start with your individual founders' tales and then how the two of you kind of came together on this.
There's a serendipitous way that we came to working together, but the story really starts with Desmond 4 years ago. My journey begins a little bit more recently.
Well, there's two things that I was always really passionate about. One was education and sharing, as much knowledge as I can with everyone that I can. So that passion was always there. But I guess the passion around money started very early for me. I feel like this company and this product and this platform is the culmination of close to 40 years in the making. The actual company, was conceived about 4 years ago. And I've just always had a passion or curiosity about money. Back when I was a kid, your parents get paid and they put their money in the bank. And, I was the one curious kid. So I was always like, why would you take your money and give it to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, your parents explain to you, no, it's safe to put it there. In fact, that, they'll actually give you more money if you keep your money there. I said, wow, so that seems kind of reverse to me because, you're asking them to safeguard your money, but now they're paying you for the service that you're asking for. So I never understood, I didn't understand that, which, sparked that curiosity that was my first, curiosity about banks and how money worked. And I think it was right around that time, probably high school, I decided that, a Wall Street career was in my future and I needed to really kind of get a better feel for money and how money worked.
Yeah.
Like I said, part of my passion is also educating. So the more I learn, the more I want to help teach.
Yeah.
And so when the opportunity was presented to me about 4 years ago to start a nonprofit, I told, my colleague, Tomas Gordon, I said, hey, if I'm going to do a nonprofit, it's going to be, financial literacy.
Yep.
And, being the person that he is, he said, let's go. And, Dealing with Debt was born.
Great. And then Addison, you were saying you staked in a little more recently, but also you have a long history in financial education, financial literacy. Can you catch folks up a little bit on that side of things?
My history is a little bit different. It's in financial publishing. I have been a publisher of financial newsletters, which are primarily subscribed to by people who have enough money to worry about it. And they're making their own decisions about investing in stocks or bonds or moving it from one asset class to another. And they're looking for alternative ideas than just turning their money over to like a money manager, or they might be even more entrepreneurial and they have like a Schwab account and they're trying to do it themselves. So
Yep.
I never really thought of it during my career as education, but in a way it's education in alternative thinking about how the stock market works, how the economy works. And over the course of that 30 years, I've written 5 books on what I consider to be macroeconomic topics, themes that impact money itself. One of the books is called Demise of the Dollar, and it's an analysis of the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world, but also as the currency that we use that is subject to inflation every 30 or 40 years. And we're going through that right now. So it's a point to bring to the table for dealing with debt. There's a lot of people that are like, what is inflation for the first time? And it's really a factor of the government trying to manage a fiat currency. And then I've written another book. Both of these books, by the way, ended up on the New York Times bestseller list.
Nice.
Which was a pleasant surprise given the topics. But the second one is called Empire of Debt. And it was really a history of the growth of debt in the 20th century. It became an active financial tool for the government, for corporate banking became a big issue in the 20th century. And then consumer debt, especially starting in the 90s, 80s with the Reagan revolution, exploded. Going back to our personal lives, I can remember getting my first credit cards in the 80s, like a lot of people can remember it. Like they started mailing out what I thought at the time was free money.
Right.
And I'd take the card, go spend it, and oh, wait a minute, you have to pay this back. So that whole outward bound marketing of credit cards really changed the way consumers think. I like to say that we've, from a nation of savers, investors, to a nation that believes saving is you're spending less to get another product.
Right.
So we call it like, yeah, there's a sale, I'm going to save money. Or like
Yeah.
you go to Marshall's and you find some name brand thing for 30% off. You buy it even if you don't need it because you're like,
Right.
cheap. And I saved money.
Yeah. It's a sale. Yeah.
Instead of saving money and then investing in productive assets, culturally, we've moved on to where we're really managing our debt levels. And
Right.
that was the source of the conversation that Desmond and I had. We'd known each other. We're actually neighbors from the same neighborhood in Baltimore.
Right. For those of you watching, there's a lovely backdrop of the Inner Harbor at sunset behind these guys. They're not literally there breaking the fourth wall, but yeah, you guys are repping for Baltimore.
Charm City.
So we met in the alleyway because I walked my dog down the alleyway, and Desmond just built new garage in the back, which is the size of most people's houses on the block. And I was curious, what's going on in there, Desmond? Like, what are you building in there? Hey, we started the conversation and he was telling me about dealing with debt. And I had been writing about that for 30 years. So this actually gave me a huge opportunity in my career. I've been a publisher for a long time. I'm well-versed in marketing and the subscription-based model and all the tools that you need to be a successful publisher.
Right.
Likewise, I've covered debt and the markets and the way people manage their own money. But I've never had the opportunity to actually address what people do when they come to the table and they don't have money. Most of the subscribers to our publications, they already have money. They understand how it works a little bit. And now they're looking for alternative ideas. In this case, a lot of the consumers of our products, I felt like they really needed a base level understanding of financial literacy. Or they can go on to manage their own investment accounts and stuff like that. So this gives me an opportunity in a judgment-free community to help people really get over the hump of managing their own debt, but also developing a healthy relationship with debt.
Right.
We'll cover this a little bit later, but one of the cornerstone concepts that we're going to teach everyone that comes through the door is that not all debt is created equal. There's good debt and there's bad debt. And just that fundamental concept is a useful sort of breakthrough point for people, especially people that have gotten in over their heads for whatever reason. And a natural reaction is to be like, oh, debt is bad, but debt is not necessarily bad. If you have a healthy relationship with it, you can actually use it as a tool to build wealth.
Right. And that's the biggest point that I think of the platform that we're focused on is really helping people manage their relationship with debt and with their money. And to the extent that they can have a healthier relationship, I think, they'll reduce their financial stress. But as Addison, mentioned, we are neighbors, and I had known about him long before, he knew what I was doing. He was curious about what I was doing, but I was well aware.
Yeah, I was curious about your garage.
About the garage.
It's an impressive garage.
What's he doing out there? But when dealing with debt was conceived, when I had the idea for dealing with debt, the concept behind it, as far as being from my standpoint, I understood that financial education was important to the demographic that he wasn't writing to at the time.
Yeah.
And it was extremely important for folks in that demographic to understand, how money worked and how to have a better relationship with their money.
Yeah.
What I was really excited to hear from Addison when he was walking his dog that day is that he had a significant interest. I knew who he was writing to. I knew about the company. And when I conceived dealing with debt, it was the model was based on the company that he helped start 30 years ago. And I basically kind of stole their model. And that's how I wanted to approach dealing with debt, was the same way that Addison and the company he was working for, the way they approached educating their, higher net worth folks. So I saw most financial literacy projects were transactional. And I thought that financial education had to be a perpetual and ongoing process, the same way that the publishings that Addison was doing around, stocks in the market and teaching folks how to invest their own money.
Right.
And so when Addison came into the driveway to talk to me that day, I thought, here's my one shot. It was almost like the,
Eminem song. Yeah.
Got one shot here.
Yeah.
Really sell this thing. And
well, now he can't get rid of it.
But also, the stuff you're working on become more relevant in a lot of people's minds lately because the whole financial picture has been much more turbulent this year. 2025 has been a bit of a bumpy ride so far. And as we were setting up for this interview, I did notice, articles about debt despair and financial dysmorphia. And if you think about, the TikTok generation is growing up with popular culture talking about money and acquiring things and whatever it might be. But like the messaging around having a healthy relationship with your self-concept around financial literacy, but also even like wealth generation and other mental models that are probably helpful for folks. To some extent, I think there's dealing with debt, but then there's also more stuff, that you're kind of tapping into, Addison, on the other side. What's been missing on the side of folks who maybe haven't been getting this message? What would you say to them?
The most important thing is to make that realization that we are a consumer culture, and that rise of credit, the credit industry that I was talking about began in the 70s. I think Diners Club started in the 50s, but Amex started going, and then
Yeah.
Visa and MasterCard. And then you had like the low end ones where you could
Yeah.
use credit cards to build that. Everybody's got credit cards. We're even talking about moving the dollar into a digital dollar now because everyone uses digitized payments for everything,
Right.
which is not necessarily a good idea, but that's a political point. But we, along with the growth of the credit industry, the consumer culture took over. And a lot of people, they don't look at their own productivity and then equate that to their spending. So there is a direct correlation with the income that you bring in, how much you save, and how much you can spend. If you have a credit card that allows you to spend more in excess of what you bring in, then you're actually just managing debt levels.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get into all the details, and we will on the app. We'll get into all the details of what happens when you get in over your head in debt and you're just covering your minimum payments.
Right.
Because you're never going to catch up at that. There's a couple of articles that we posted just recently about why it's really difficult to pay off credit cards if you don't really understand what's happening.
Let's get a little further into dealing with debt on that front then too, in that, we'll get into the app and the places where you can help folks who are really needing this financial literacy education, building on Addison's background and a lot of the good thinking on that front. But there's also a more advocacy component to what you're doing as well, Desmond.
Yeah, we're building a community, right? And I think that community is going to consist of folks that we're providing, knowledge and that they can consume on financial education. But at the same time, I think it's important that consumers maintain their rights as far as being able to advocate on their own behalf when it comes to, situations when they're in debt and trying to get out of debt, and just making sure that they have an ability, a platform, basically a coalition.
Yeah.
That can advocate with each other to maintain their consumer rights.
So they have more of a voice as a collective rather than as an individual. And that's kind of the sense of community that you're talking about building here. And then there's a public affairs component that goes with that. But then there's also within your community, there's other folks. Can you get a little more into who are the people in your neighborhood? That's a shout out to Mr. Rogers for those of you who still remember him. And then maybe we can get into some of the features of the user experience as well.
Right. So on the platform, we have, different folks that are in there. Some are influencers who have their own messages. What we've really wanted to do is build a platform that can be a delivery vehicle. So we've got groups. It's a social platform, which my daughter told me it had to be because that's where everyone is. She said, if you're going to build a community, it's got to be on a social platform and it has to be an app. So when we built it on a social platform, what we realized that we could do is basically be a delivery vehicle for, not just our own internal messages out to the community that we're building, but we also want to be facilitators of that peer-to-peer interaction. And in some cases, that's influencer to peer interaction. So within the platform, it's just like any other social platform. You can have groups, you can have discussion threads, and anyone can run their own discussion thread. And that thread might be, we just, we're bringing on folks now that are running first responder groups. So it's a group that is, specifically for people that are first responders and military. It talks to, their concerns and their needs as it relates to financial wellness as well as personal wellness.
Right.
So it's really a delivery vehicle for, a multitude of messages that we are inviting folks onto the platform. And saying, hey, not only can you bring your community here, we'll help you build on top of that community, and everyone's here. And the key thing that was said earlier is that, money has always been something that people didn't openly talk about. It's very isolating once you get
Hmm.
to a place where you're financially uncomfortable, whether you're in debt or just uncertain about what your financial future looks like.
Yeah.
It can be a lonely place. And it's the one thing that everyone experiences. I don't care who you are, you're going to be at some point feel somewhat financially insecure.
Right.
And you don't have to do that alone. And that's what we're building as a community where everyone understands that, hey, this is not specific to me. This is not a failure of mine. It's a situation that I'm in. And if I lean on the community, then I can, get the knowledge, support, and confidence, to get where they want to go.
My background is alternative ideas. We give alternative ideas for income, different ways to think about what you do when you have like a side hustle. You save that money for a purpose, actually strategically planning to not just deal with the debt that you have, but also either use it as a tool to acquire things that you need or you want, and also use it as a tool to build future wealth or understand how money works so that even if you're not using debt as a tool, you can save money, invest. I think it works as a community at the support level, but also knowing that there's a group of people out there that share that concern and are also advocating at like the legislative level for the rights. I think it's
Right.
to know that this cohort of people exists and
Hmm.
there's millions of them. There are
Right.
millions of people that
Yeah.
are dealing with debt.
And if I understand you right, it sounds like there's some virtuous feedback loops that could get built into this, where as folks maybe get out of that crisis and start to get their life on track, they kind of want to give back to the community that was able to kind of help them through that time of crisis. So it's really helpful to have that safety net there. But then even on the other side, that desire to give back and kind of pay forward where
And
you've been helped.
you're hitting on the most gratifying part of what we do because we work with folks wherever they are on their financial path, right? So it could be folks who are just coming out of college that are saying, hey, I want to put together a plan for life that, where I always have like financial confidence. That's more of the preventative side. We're going to be doing a lot of work there. But we're also working with people who are in crisis that are currently in debt. And, we're providing resources and support for them. And then we're working with folks that were in a crisis who found their way out. And I think that's what you're hitting on. Those are the coaches on our platform who have come back and said, we know we were in that situation. We're here to help people who are currently in that situation. And we're going to provide them, the support, one-on-one coaching. And that's probably the most gratifying unit that we're building here at Dealing with Debt is that core of coaches
Hmm.
come back from a bad debt situation and said, I want to give back and I want to work with the folks who were in the shoes that I were in, just a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And that whole mentor program is amazing. And it's really starting to take root now.
Yeah, I think for me, the most important component of that is, if I'm looking at the macro picture, there's a lot of people that are dealing with that, as it were. But talking to the individual coaches, everyone has a unique story, and everybody that comes in and joins as a member has a unique story. Not everyone ends up in the same place the same way.
Hmm.
Yeah, having those people that have firsthand experience that is unique to them, and then what they learned in the process is really helpful for people that are like, that's not my situation, but I can see the parallels and
Right.
somebody there that's actually listening.
Yeah, I've been struck by the parallels between what you're talking about around financial health and wellness, around the broader self-care, wellness, self-improvement movement that's out there. To your point, Desmond, it does almost feel like some of the stigma and taboo around talking about negative financial situations or even just finances in general. It's almost like we have to break through those sort of mental barriers, but then there's a broader wave, around like app enabled mindfulness and wellness and fitness and health. It's sort of a logical extension of that thinking would apply to your financial wellness.
Absolutely. And that's driving a lot of our publishing right now is to try to break through those types of stigmas and the shame that people have with it and help them understand that number one, you're not the first to go through this and you won't be the last. And, with the platform itself, the way that we have it set up is that no one operates under their given name, right? So
Mm,
everyone operates under a screen name.
right.
No one's allowed to share you can't do that on the platform. So we feel like if we give people a space where they can truly let down their guard and be vulnerable, right? And
Mhm,
they're not going to be shamed for it. They're not going to be judged for it. They're going to be supported, for sharing.
right. Mhm,
Just last night we had someone, share a post that was talking about how it was actually a positive. They paid off their automobile loan early. And when, to their dismay, their credit score dropped 5 points.
mhm,
And they could not, they were having a trouble understanding that. And the group stepped up, like a lot of folks responded and said, hey, there's some nuance to credit score, which, talks about age of accounts. And I don't want to get into the details of it, but hey, it's temporary. Don't worry. It'll come back. It's a net positive at the end of the day. But those are the types of interactions that I think is indicative of the community that we're trying to create, is to
mhm,
give everyone a place where they can really just share their experience and have
mhm.
others share theirs.
Yeah. And Addison, I'm the proud parent of a 6-year-old right now, so I'm thinking very much about like developmental stages and the different audiences that are out there. My son wasn't ready to ride a bike without training wheels, and then suddenly he was, but how do we think about folks' kind of progression where, you've been dealing with sort of the high end of the spectrum, folks maybe on all manner of places within a larger sort of continuum? How do you make sure that folks are getting the right messaging and they're not sort of drawn astray by listening to the wrong types of messages?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because early in my publishing career, I created a program that was intended for children or
Mm,
people to teach their children how to save money, like create buckets for your money and understand that it's not just, try to understand what it is, how to save it, how to invest it, how to use it for charity.
mhm,
You don't often teach, you don't get it in school anymore.
yeah,
Program that's called Seeds of Wealth. And the idea is that we were already talking to parents who were trying to manage their own money. And here's a tool set that they could use to teach their children how to
mhm,
sort of intuitively know how money worked from an early age.
yeah,
And we set a goal in the program of showing your child how to be a millionaire by the time they were age 30 without doing anything, because all they had to do is save the money, invest it, use it for paper route, or all the things that like Horatio Alger would talk about 100 years ago, but
yeah,
somehow lost in our culture.
mhm,
We want to instill those habits from an early age. But what I found when we were marketing that book to our own audience, we're like, hey, we developed this thing because we have kids. We're trying to teach them and we feel like it'd be useful for you too. A lot of people were buying it in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and saying, I'm going to use this because
yeah,
I never learned it either. So
right,
it does hit that broad range of cohorts, but the concepts are the same.
mhm,
So we've unearthed it. I'm going to actually turn it into an interactive course. I haven't done that yet, but we have all the original materials, and it comes along with actual advice on things. If you want to save money and get dividends, here's a body and
yeah,
invest in or whatever. It has specific
yeah,
advice go along with it. And that advice changes because the markets change,
right,
the economy changes. There's a lot of things that happen where the advice doesn't necessarily apply except for at that moment.
yeah,
From a publishing perspective, it's an ongoing thing, but the root or project of financial literacy is the first thing is get out of debt. And a lot of
right,
people that I talk to through my publishing career are like, hey, you advocate getting out of debt before you're using any of your products. How do I do that? That is a perennial question that people have. So
right,
space that we can help people deal with their debt, but also we're providing the tools that they need to understand how to think about money properly, how to use debt properly if they need
right,
to get a better education, a better job, or if you need a car to get to your job or whatever. There's a lot of things that debt is useful for.
mhm,
Buying a house so that you can raise a family in it. Those are things I would consider that's a useful, productive use of debt as long as you understand how it works.
right.
Don't get into some crazy adjustable rate mortgage that you can't afford.
Right. It kind of reminds me of growth mindset
Full
too,
time.
and getting out of an imposter syndrome about wealth. getting folks comfortable with the right frameworks in their mind and like how they think, where I could see you needing both those things, ways to kind of shift minds. But then to your point, Addison, you also want like very tactical tips and tricks and things that I can do right now that are going to start moving the needle for me. Desmond, as we're getting closer to conclusion, where do you see this stuff heading? This was a brainchild of yours from 4 years ago. The world seems to change very fast nowadays. We made it this far without talking about artificial intelligence, but I went ahead and did it. What are your thoughts in terms of the future and where some of this work might lead?
That's a good question. We're going to build the community first, and that'll drive us, right? And you mentioned AI. Those are the types of things that we are going to leverage and deploy. And the main thing is just keeping a pulse on where people are. We want to meet people where they are. So the only way to do that is to engage them in conversation and see where they are and where they're going and make our adjustments, accordingly as far as what our guidance is, where the needs are. We discussed a lot about how to deal with your debt, but then there's also ways that you can also prevent yourself from getting into debt if you're hedged the right way, right? From a standpoint of, being covered, because we're looking at things as far as what causes debt. Usually they're large unforeseen expenses and things like that usually may have been preventable. We're going to build the community, hear what they're talking about, see what the needs are and evolve with them as a community. But the main thing, I think the most important step for us right now is to build the community.
Right. And make sure people don't feel like they're on their own, because the stakes are really high, right? Like from a lot of what I'm reading around almost like the emotional and psychological toll of kind of the negative frames that can kind of cycle in the wrong direction. The stakes are extremely high. Addison, as folks are heading back to the rest of their lives, any parting thoughts, any words of wisdom as we start to wind up?
2 points based on what you just brought up. 2 things. One is that money problems do create despair. It's important to recognize that because
Biggie said that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's in pop culture already, but it doesn't have to be. That's the thing, is that you can figure out a solution. And you know what? You're going to have to figure out a solution one way or another. So might as well have a smile on your face when you're doing it. And then the second thing is, I do think that AI is going to be important. It's already an important tool for us. We use it. We can produce content much more efficiently now. I do think the input matters, the tools and the way that we develop them and the quality of the information that goes into them matters. But I work with a ton of writers, other publishers, marketers and stuff like that. Everyone's afraid of AI, like it's going to put them out of their jobs or something. And
Right.
I think so. I think it's going to make everyone who has good ideas way more productive, and it makes the dissemination and the access to information that is useful much easier.
Yeah.
And the community like ours, we embrace AI as a tool because we can get a lot done in an efficient way that gets kinds of ideas into the right hands.
It's helping us help a lot more people. You can help a lot more people.
Blanket statement that's not related to debt, though. The economy is going to change as dramatically under the AI revolution as it did when everybody started using emails.
Yes.
And then when Zoom came along, AI is just an iteration of that information revolution. But this one's going to be much more dramatic because computers can do a lot of the things that we might think of, but it takes us months to do. They can do it instantaneously. So,
Right. Yeah. And on the upside, I've heard a lot about like the benefit on an educational front of having like a tutor in your pocket. Now you also kind of have a financial advisor in your pocket. And the issue there is like, how do I make sure it's not hallucinating and it's not kind of unvetted? And that's where smaller language models with more control over what goes in, what goes out, you actually can start to tailor stuff to really steer people in the right direction.
yeah, I think it's a huge benefit. I don't think people should be afraid of it. And anyone who is dealing with debt on their own, whether it's a crisis situation or just trying to learn about it, embrace it, because that is the way that, especially the information economy and dealing with banks and that kind of stuff, that's all going to be driven by AI. So embrace it, learn what you can, and be one of the inputs.
Yes. I think Ethan Mollick says, be the human in the loop, like actually use the tools. Don't just say hypothetically humans should be in the loop, like actually be that human. And then
they have to be. Otherwise, we're going to have machines that don't know what they're doing.
Exactly. We've all seen Wall-E. Well, it's been an amazing conversation, guys. Any final words, Desmond, as we say goodbye?
The final words, I would say we recently launched March 25th. We got our first users onto the platform. We've onboarded quite a few more, since that time. We're really starting to get the community established. And I would say, if there's one final word I would say is, get onto the platform and let's talk about it. The community's there to support you. It's a judgment-free space. You can really just get in there and share your experiences and absorb the experiences of others. And I think the more we do that, no matter what the topic is, whether it's financial education or any other topic, the better we'll be. And, our goal here is to reduce financial stress and make people healthier.
The tagline we came up with. We're solving the national health crisis one budget at a time.
Nice.
I love that tagline because it shows the work, like how we're going to do it. It talks to how we're going to do it.
We came up with that on our own. There was no AI involved.
Nice.
Only humans in the loop on that one.
Take that, ChatGPT. And then if folks want to find out more about this, where should folks go?
Dealingwithdebt.org. Click join now.
Desmond, Stinnie, and Addison, Wiggin, thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, do all the good things. This is Trending in Education.